Today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks.
Good afternoon and a warm welcome to you all. Thanks indeed for being here. Just a reminder, we're on air. That's what that sign is up there. So we are live, and we welcome those that may be listening on home or wherever they in their office, wherever they may be. Welcome to you as well. And a reminder for mobile phones in this room, if you could have them switched off, as it does interfere with our recording system. Please be seated. Thank you. I have no apologies today, so as we open the meeting, declaration of interest. Councillor Mackenzie? 8.1. Any other? Councillor Dakin? 8.1. Councillor Dakin? Any other declaration of interest? All right. Confirmation of the minutes. Somebody happy to move the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 21st of March? Move Councillor Harris, second Deputy Mayor. All those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. There's no deputations, no petitions. Community reports. I believe we do have a community report from Joe Archer from the Peace Trust. Thank you very much, Joe. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, councillors. I'm told I've got 4 minutes, so I'm going to rush. I'm enjoying this opportunity to give you an update on the 2009 Peace Festival that will happen in August, on and around the 15th to the 17th of August. And this year's theme will be around the power of integrity, and the theme chosen in light of the recent Pain Royal Commission and the notion of ethics and integrity in leadership and its role in how we direct our communities. I just wanted to remind everybody present of what we think we've formed a solid place on the town calendar, and that we are impacting particularly young people in looking at ways that they can resolve conflict without violence and enhance the goodwill of our community.
Thank you very much, Joe, and thank you to you and your board for the work you are doing for the many years, or a number of years now that it has happened. Appreciate that, and I know from my involvement and also going around in past years, there's a lot of schools have got involved, and it is encouraging to see the work they're doing. So thank you for all this done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks to Council for its ongoing support. We would never have got off the ground without it, so we very much appreciate it.
Good. Thank you. So we go on to public question time. We have no public questions on notice. There's none of those. Those from the previous meeting are there. But any public questions without notice?
I've asked a couple of questions, and I noticed the answer, the latest answer, which has been about flags, we've got the harassment to okay. Is the council in the process of reviewing projects Christmas Street Mall against the master plan principles by officers and councils? Would it be appropriate perhaps to have the public and maybe even traders in on that consultation? Because I believe there are a number of matters possibly substantial and outstanding and may require adjustment in the future.
Well, look, Council have heard that, and we will consider that obviously as we have in our discussions in due course.
Brings me to another element of the Christmas Street Mall stemming from the city council works. I work at the west end of the Christmas Street Mall. There's an item called feature platform. It's a raised large structure, seats there, 30, 40 people, has a top platform, has mobile phone chargers. It's become a driver of antisocial behaviour, I believe. It seems to attract youth who seem to behave in a way that is something we haven't seen in that recently. We have had a feature platform before, and it's identified as being a driver of antisocial behaviour. That was removed, it was cut up by engineers and taken away. Is there anything council could do with the feature platform at the West End, if indeed you recognise that there is a problem?
Well, that's the first that I've heard of that, but I'm sure we can take that on notice and to follow it up.
And the third question relates again to city fund works in Christmas Street Mall. The sculptures, very nice that they are, and we did appreciate them where they were expensive. The tigers, I understand, $25,000 each. They're very low, and we have had people now that have actually bought them. I don't know if they've brought it to the attention of council or whether they've just shrugged it off, not required too much attention. But it now is a problem, I believe, and it's not something that is necessarily going to go away. The first question I'd have really seeking answer is, did council conduct what we call a safety audit for the school? Certainly a very low, and it might be something council had done. And secondly, if council had conducted some kind of safety audit, would that be available to us?
Thank you. General Manager.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. We certainly did undertake a risk assessment prior to and also subsequently to the statues being installed. We are currently, obviously, those incidents that you've referred to have been reported to council, and we are actively investigating that, and that certainly we will ensure that if there needs to be any remedial work done, that will happen, but in the due course of following the investigation. So.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? No, thank you. So, under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993, Council acts as a planning authority in regard to items included in the agenda under item 8, Planning Authority. So the first one is item 8.1, 233A Charles Street. We do have a number of speakers. General Manager, if you could read out the rules for the speakers. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. Only residents and ratepayers or those on the City of Launceston electoral roll may address an item on the agenda. Before speaking, please state your name and address or property owned in Launceston. You may speak for up to 2 minutes and no extensions of time will be permitted. You must speak for or against the recommendations and not ask questions of council or council officers or attempt to enter into debate with councillors or council officers. Statements can only be made either directly relating to supporting the recommendation or arguing against it. Comments and statements are not to be defamatory, offensive or abusive or be designed to embarrass any person, including councillors or council officers. Statements are not to be repetitive of statements or points already made. Several people speaking a common position should nominate a single speaker on their behalf. The Mayor may ask a member of the gallery to cease speaking if the above procedures are not followed. Following hearing of the comments from the gallery, councillors will then consider the item.
Thank you, General Manager. Mark Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, councillors. The two main areas of concern for residents and businesses in the vicinity of the proposed development are parking levels and noise levels. I think it's important to consider and recognise at this point that the burden of proof here does not lie with the residents and businesses to demonstrate that the proposed development application meets all the planning scheme requirements. That burden is with the applicant. It is the applicant's responsibility to demonstrate that their development application satisfies the planning requirements and the effect on the existing environment and community. As explained in our submissions and subsequent emails, the applicant's two independent reports on noise levels and the parking and traffic report only contemplate areas that support their application. The parking and traffic report only examines the weekday morning session parking 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. The planner conditions his recommendation on a sharing arrangement with Dr. Jensen's 11 leased spaces. The recommendation is problematic because the hours of operation of the practice overlap with the applicants. Dr. Jensen starts surgery some mornings at 6:30 a.m. and consults 2 nights a week until 9 p.m. What happens in the mid-morning classes or the afternoon, early evening classes, Saturdays and Sunday mornings? I'm sure you've all had problems finding a parking spot for the coffee shops or the restaurants that are in the street. Noise report. I've provided written comments by email, but add the following. The planner in his recommendation states words to the effect that council generally doesn't question a consultant's professional tests or knowledge. We are also not questioning his test or knowledge. This is the Dakari report. We are questioning the simulated noise levels that were provided by the applicant. With 10 or so actual classes per day, why a simulated test? I mean, you can make your own conclusions on that. I know that we have as a group. In conclusion, it's the applicant's responsibility to satisfy the councillors that the application complies with all the parking operational windows, not just the one that provides the best result, and that the noise level report reflects the actual noise levels generated by the classes. It is our view that the applicant has not met the burden of proof required to allow the councillors to vote yes on this development application. We ask you to vote the application down.
Thank you. Mary Starry.
Mary Starry, property owned in Launceston, 218 Charles Street, 35 Canning Street and 372 Glenwood Road.
You're right.
Now my 2 minutes? Yep. I'm very nervous. One of the zone criteria, as written in the zone purpose statement item 5111, is to provide for the integration of residential, retail, community service and commercial activities in urban locations. Also, as stated under the use standards of 15.3.1, hours of operation, the objective is to ensure that non-residential users do not cause unreasonable loss of amenity to nearby sensitive users. How can this business meet the council's own standards as the hours of operation, which I believe have been amended since I've had the information, and noise levels through music, car movements and personal conversations from a minimum of 5 a.m, 5 days of the week and 5:45 Saturday and Sunday not be deemed unreasonable, as this will cause the loss of sleep and the precious early morning quiet time 7 days of the week? Is this not a loss of amenity for the residents in the area, which are the majority of users in the immediate vicinity? I'm also concerned about losing the urban village feel of this precinct created during weekends by reduced business activities in the neighbourhood, thus contributing to a relaxed atmosphere around the local cafes, greengrocer, hairdresser, etc. for residents and tourists. If the council is genuine in its desire to encourage inner city living, then this style of development should be denied, as it is more suited to an industrial area, not a heritage vicinity, incorporating good quality, low impacting businesses. I will leave the technical details to others, but as will be demonstrated, the reports submitted with this proposal are superficial and underestimate both the noise and parking problems that will be generated by this development. As a past long-serving councillor informed me during a recent conversation regarding this DA, it would be practically, if not impossible, to stop this gym if they do not adhere to the proposed conditions such as noise control and traffic impact once they are given permission to proceed. As is often the case, you don't realise the value of something till you are about to lose it, and I, along with many of my neighbours, do not want to lose the sense of community and harmony currently enjoyed in this area due to the inappropriate transference of a noise and traffic generating pre-existing business currently operating from two other sites in a predominantly...
Yep, thank you. Your time is up now. Thank you. Richard Edwards.
Richard Edwards, 178 St John Street. I'm speaking for the proposal. The representations we've heard principally around traffic and noise, and appreciate the concerns and opinions of residents in the area. However, there is material evidence from experts who provided advice with respect to this matter in terms of noise and parking, and they do cover all hours of the day. They do find that the use is within an acceptable criteria and well inside. There are additional conditions on the approval which mitigate the risks even further. And I believe that in conjunction with the council recommendation should be given the greatest amount of weight. Mindful also that I've just been made aware of some other suggested conditions, and I think, look, the tenants want to be good neighbours. They don't want to cause problems, and the suggestion of some equipment to be provided to monitor the ongoing, certainly early on in the piece, what sort of noise is being created, despite the advice of the experts. I think that's reasonable, but and everybody wants a good outcome. Let's also be mindful of where this is. 10,000 movements a day on Charles Street, directly opposite a shopping centre. Other permitted uses without discretion, hotel industry, restaurant. I would argue that this is far less offensive than a lot of all those other uses. In fact, you have a business here that wants to grow, wants to employ other people, has a strong backing in the community, yet, and they're stuck with this for 12 months, they can't find alternate premises. If you stand on that corner, look around, look at the experts' advice, well, it really is probably a fantastic alternative and very positive, I think. Mind you, get the equipment in there, ongoing monitoring, that's fine.
Yep, thank you. No, sorry, it's not the system. Any other speakers that haven't spoken? No, we'll move on. Someone happy to move a motion? Councillor Harris moves an amended motion. If you just explain the amendment for the public, thank you.
Okay. The amended motion is that we insert a new clause 3B on noise measuring equipment. Prior to the commencement of use, noise measuring equipment must be installed and utilised on site to the satisfaction of the manager of city development to ensure there is no unreasonable impact to surrounding uses. We have amended item 8, business hours of operation. The operation of the fitness studio must be confined to the hours of Monday to Friday, 6:45am to 7:30am, 9:30am to 12:30 and 4:45 to 8:30. Saturday, 7am to 1pm, Sunday, 8am to 12pm, Monday to Friday for personal training, 8am to 5pm. And a new inserted clause, item 9, Canning Street entrance, that is the 2 glass doors that face to Canning Street, must be locked and closed during the use of noise emitting equipment.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Is there a seconder for the motion? Councillor Dawkins. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris? Oh, question first from Councillor Soward.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor, and I appreciate, and I know Mr Edwards did acknowledge the condition that Councillor Harris mentioned, the noise one, which was great. My question relates to the amended opening hours, and the reason I ask it, it's a broad question, Mr Mayor, relating to the 6:45 opening. It's not common in the gym sector to be opening at that time. The gyms open all over the city earlier, because that's what they do when they get their people in. So I'm just wondering if that condition has been raised with the applicant or if he's learning about this right now.
Councillor Harris.
I have had no discussion with the applicant in regard to my amended starting time. It's based on two things. The first is...
that's all right. No, you've answered the question,
okay.
and I think you can mention that
I'll
in
save
the
that
discussion. So, do you wish to speak to it now, Councillor Harris?
Thank you. No problem. To answer the question about the amended starting time, 6:45 a.m. Under residential EPA noise use, you're probably all aware that Monday to Friday at 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. that you can use your lawnmower and other noisy equipment, and on Saturdays it is 9 a.m. and Sunday it is 10 a.m. My thought pattern as to the amended hours were they did ask to start at 5:15. They would then have a 15-minute class. There'd be another one at 6 a.m. That would finish, and there'd be another one at 6:45 a.m. So rather than make them try to start at 7 a.m, I chose to bring it forward by 15 minutes. It's my view, and I had a lot of difficulty with this particular application. I think it's the wrong business model in their particular location. However, I do think the reports that our experts have theoretically worked out, they need the opportunity to prove it can work, if you like. And so by doing so, they would have one class in the morning. We can then monitor what actually emits from the building, and if it is above the EPA limits and outside the theoretical that is worked out, it can then be shut down. The parking issue is another of big concern, and it is something that the amended responsibility is, I think, for 11 spots to be provided in the car park up to 8 a.m, and obviously this would allow this to work as well. There is sufficient space within the street parking to allow one class in the morning, and of course we don't have a changeover time as well. Should the applicant then meet being a good neighbour, as they hope, and actually then keep the noise within the studio, then he could apply to perhaps extend those hours to 6 a.m. or even 5:15 a.m, and a separate decision can then be made on that. But he may choose to find that this doesn't make his business commercially viable, and he might find another site. And so that's really for the commercial operation of him to do it, rather than for us to say, no, you can't. The problem with the building is it was built as a school hall, and it's now being used for something that it was never designed to do. And that is also why I've suggested that the doors that face onto Canning Street have to be locked at all times in an effort to keep the sound within the walls, as well as implementing all of the sound engineers' requirements in regard to upgrading and sealing off that building to keep the noise in. I, as I said, have great sympathy for those who do live nearby, but we don't know what we don't know. And I think if the applicant chooses to go ahead in this amended level, 6:45 a.m. isn't quite as bad as 5:15, I'm sure, but we would then be able to make a real assessment at some future stage about whether this development application can actually go forward. Not actually able to make any comment or questions from the gallery, but thanks anyway. I think that's about me for the time being.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins.
This is one of those times where the aspirations of a business and the amenity of the community have clashed, and I expect will continue to clash with the opening hours that have been suggested. Of course, we want mixed-use business within Launceston City Central. We're looking for ways constantly to drive people into the city centre for a wide range of activities, and it's a very important conversation that we have because we're looking at accommodation first floor in the CBD. We're looking at future accommodation for UTAS in the city. We need to understand how that accommodation, that quiet enjoyment of someone's home can fit with other activities. So I think this is a reasonable approach. I'm not sure how the proponent is going to view it, how their business plan will fit with this amended motion. But I think that considering the opponents and their real concern about their own amenity, their ability to be able to sleep peacefully, enjoy the quiet morning, enjoy their village community, I think this is the only way that we can test to see whether or not this application can go ahead in its entirety in a future time, but for now, this gives them an opportunity to test it, which is something that we cannot do theoretically.
Thank you. Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Mayor, and I'm going to confine my remarks just at this stage. This may get through, but just at this stage to the amended part of the motion. And I do commend Councillor Harris for trying to come up with something that's cognisant of the needs of the residents, who I know a number of councillors had representations from and visited on site and saw and heard their concerns, and also try and meet the needs of the developer. The main remark, and it was touched on in my question, if this was I guess my concern with the amendment is that by its nature, fitness businesses open at the time they open because that's what their market says. They don't open, it doesn't matter if it's in Charles Street or William Street or Glen Dew Street or wherever it is, they open at that time because that's when their clients are coming in. So to use a little analogy, people mightn't be familiar with gym opening hours. It would be like saying to a cafe, you can open for lunch at 3:30. People would go, but that's not lunchtime. What would you do that for? So gyms in this city, and I don't know, I've lost count, I think it's about 37, there's a few of them around. They're obviously not opening up to fill in time. They're obviously a good business. They open, Mr Mayor, at those early hours of the morning because that's when the demand is, that's when the clients are. And for those of you who might be tucked up in bed at 5:30, I would suggest maybe one morning you get up early and drive past the gyms around the city and see that's where people are getting their exercise, whatever that might be. So, as I said, I'm going to confine my remarks to that part of the amendment because I think for us to impose that on a business, their business model just isn't going to work. It's just not going to work just on that basis. Just like it wouldn't work for a cafe if we said you can open for lunch at 3:30 or you can do breakfast at 11 o'clock. That's not going to suit people. So that's just the only part I want to focus on. Like Councillor Harris, and I know the representatives, there was some concern about the noise. They had some concerns about the noise in terms of how that was measured. I think that's a sensible addition, 3B, and I did hear Mr Edwards in his remarks say that he felt that that was fair as well. So I hope other aldermen speak on this, councillors speak on this, Mr Mayor, but that little 6:45 AM thing, I think it's going to make it very, very difficult for the business to work, given the sector that it works in. It wouldn't be able to work, in my view.
Just to clarify, Councillor Soward, this is not an amendment only. This is the whole motion that we are discussing now. Just checking that you speak again. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. I did a couple of drive rounds and looked at some of these other gyms or fitness centres. Youngtown, Eusted, St John Street and Kings Meadows have not got a house within 100 metres of them. This one up in Charles Street, we've got 30 elderly units that older people live in within 30 metres. We've got 10 houses within 30 to 100 metres. It's far too close for elderly people to be putting up with noise. We've got a specialist that does high-tech operations within 15 or 20 metres, trying to concentrate on operating on people. I think the noise could be an issue for him. As far as the traffic report, between 5 and 7 in Canning Street, there will be an increase of 69.5% in the traffic, and that's more than acceptable by the planning scheme. Daytime and evening parking is a major issue around that area. And this application, they've got to have 18 spots for the amount of people for the size of the building. I just don't know where they're going to find the car spots. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor, Deputy Mayor Gibson.
Thanks, Mayor. Notwithstanding that this is the alternate motion as provided by Councillor Harris, and to ensure that we are on the same page, I'd like to move an amendment to point 9 with reference to Canning Street entrance. Currently it reads the Canning Street doorway must be closed and locked during use of noise-emitting equipment. notwithstanding common sense, I think it's important that it is included in the motion, and therefore the amended point 9 would read, the Canning Street doorway must not be used for customer entry and exit, excluding for emergency purposes during the use of noise-emitting equipment.
Is there a seconder for that amendment to the motion? Well, we need a seconder first. There's no second, it lapses. Yes, you certainly can. So it's moved and seconded for the amendment to that. You want to ask a question?
Just for the point of clarification for understanding at the table, is the purpose of the amendment to ensure fire access from the building in case of fire emergency access?
Yeah. General Manager wishes to comment.
I might just say, so the condition worded in the way that it is potentially does breach building code requirements, and so the suggestion put forward by the Deputy Mayor is around ensuring that there is the same intent of the condition is applied, but the lawful or the compliance with other laws is achieved.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, you wish to speak to it?
Thank you, Mayor. Notwithstanding, this in no way indicates which way I'll vote of support. I just think it's important that we have a lawful motion and one that is reflective of the desire of the council before us.
Thank you. Councillor Finlay, anyone wish to speak to just the amendment part? Councillor Harris?
Just to say that, thank you for bringing that up, Deputy Mayor. I think leaving it as an emergency exit is fine. However, I do want to make sure that the operator does not decide to leave it open because the day is hot or similar. So we must ensure that that is also closed at all times to keep the sound in. Should there be an emergency, yes, you can then exit it, but how you word that or amend the wording, I'm not too sure, but that's how it should be. I do not want the door open because it will simply let the sound out.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak to it? I will. Your question, Councillor Finlay?
My question is, would the mover of the amendment consider that the words be closed at all times, excluding for emergency purposes during this? That may perhaps be more in line with the intentions of the mover of the motion.
Deputy Mayor?
Look, I'm happy with that, and I'll look to the General Manager for some guidance. My number one concern is that that door is available for use in emergency.
General Manager, any comment? No.
Listen, I think that still provides the same intent as was suggested. I guess the crucial part is that it's available and should, in the event of an emergency, which that would be achieved.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker?
Can it not simply just say that this door must only be used for emergency purposes?
No, I think we're right for the wording as it is. Thank you. Any other speakers? We're just talking about the amendment, which has been suggested by the Deputy Mayor. Do you wish to close it all? Can I put it to the vote? All those in favour of the amendment to become part of the motion? Those against? That's 2 against. That's carried. Now becomes the motion. So we go back to the motion with that amendment. Councillor Finlay, do you wish to speak?
Thanks, Mayor. As Councillor Dawkins raised, this really does demonstrate a point of tension within the community between the provision of growth for a local business and the enjoyment of amenity for local residents. And as further outlined by Councillor Dawkins, as we continue to go down our path of encouraging inner city living, we need to be really clear on our determinations around how we commingle business, industry, community, visitation activities in the CBD. In my mind, following on from Councillor Soward's comments, there are 2 options available before us. One is to support the alternate motion with the amended opening times and the inclusion of the noise recording equipment or the noise assessing equipment, or in fact consideration of an alternate motion that has been tabled as well, which is for refusal. I think that there's little appetite for supporting the motion as printed in the agendas, as that it does seek to unreasonably impose on the amenity of local residents. So I'm open to hearing from the balance of councillors before I make my final determination, but subject to this motion being lost, I would look to support a motion if it was tabled for refusal. And for me, the critical issue in terms of the instruments of the planning scheme is actually parking, traffic management and parking. That the scheme does require, and I know Councillor Spencer mentioned 18, but the initial assessment of the scheme requires 23 car parking spaces, but there's provision in the next layer of consideration for that to be at 90%, which would be 20 or 21, and the premises provides, or the business provides 2. So to me, in terms of the consideration of reasonableness, it's unreasonable for a business to provide 2 car parking spaces in the assessed application before us when the initial requirement of the scheme is 23. So on that ground alone, I think there are reasonable grounds for refusal. And then the more tricky consideration is around noise. And with noise, we have a qualified report attached from the applicants for our consideration, and how that is actually applied to the use of the business. And we have also real use examples of where there has been a conflict in the commingling of residential and particularly gym operations, but not only gym operations, but where within a building there are constant and varied times of the day high levels of music activity. And for me, the impact of the quiet enjoyment of the space in the inner city where it's a residential, it's got the nature, character, a residential character, then that is of concern. I'm tending towards not supporting, I commend the motion, but as I've heard the conversation and as I've considered in my mind this application within the scheme, I think the car parking provides for refusal, but also the precedent that we set going forward in terms of how there is this commingled enjoyment of the CBD spaces, that I'd also be open to considering a refusal motion. Happy to hear contributions from other councillors.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. I do appreciate the efforts that Councillor Harris has gone to try and get this particular development approved. However, I do have similar difficulties as outlined by Councillor Finlay. I tend to agree with her deliberations, so I won't go into those. I will just take up a couple of points, so that the proponent, Mr. Edwards, mentioned that there are other buildings or businesses in the region in the area that do create similar issues, but I tend to disagree. I think that this business does bring with it a volume and an intensity in terms of noise, in terms of parking requirements, and traffic movements, people movements, that is different to any other business in the area, maybe with the exception of the supermarket, which obviously has its own parking. He mentions also about alternative premises, and I wish him well on that journey. I'm not sure if that is correct, when I suppose we're all aware of development opportunities in this town that of various sorts. And I suppose the only other point is that I would reinforce what Councillor Finlay talks about, the council needing to really focus on its priority of wanting to maintain the amenity for inner city living. And having said all that, I will struggle to support the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. I don't need to repeat a lot of what has been said, other than to say I do believe that this site is a perfect site for development, and I think it's really important that the representatives and those speaking today realise that some change is going to occur in due course. And for me, it's whether or not the change of use and the class that we're being asked to consider today is the best use of that particular site. With regard to the size of the classes, you know, with 42 participants, an upward limit of 42 participants in those weekday classes, irrespective of the alteration to the business hours or not, that is a significant impact. And we know that, particularly in the mornings and in the evenings, that the majority of gym goers will have their own car. They'll be on the way to work, or they'll be going home after the gym, or they'll be on their way home from work. So to have 42 participants, an upper limit of 42 participants, is going to have an impact, and the potential of those participants and those classes to cross over is very real. And so thus, you know, the upward limit of potentially 84 participants crossing over at one time is real. You've heard Councillor Finlay reference the 2 dedicated parking spaces. That's deficient of what is required. And I think, whilst I acknowledge that this site is ripe for progress and they are within their limits of applying to use this as a gym for sport and recreation purposes, I don't think it's the best fit moving forward, and I won't be supporting the motion.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Cox.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Before we all start congratulating Councillor on his efforts, it's a big introduction to this I could not have supported the original motion. I'm not going to repeat what's been said. Many years ago in a different place, I had the pleasure of living next door to Richie for about a month. And I wanted to do one with harm or something like that. I have huge sympathy for the people and the residents that are there. I don't believe changing government names is going to be beneficial to the private. That's what we're going to do. Councillor Sowers said. I must admit, parking is an issue. And to suggest that there is a bus stop 100 metres away, I'm just not really sure how many people are heading off to the gym there on the bus. I mean, I don't think there'll be a bus at the original time. So, for all the reasons that have already been given, again, Councillor Harris, the director,
Danny. Oh, it doesn't matter. He didn't have his mic. No. No, Councillor Cox didn't have it on. Any other speakers? Councillor Harris, you wish to close?
Yes, thank you. I do thank all the other councillors for their thoughts. I think as a council we should look to see how businesses can be accommodated. It sounds like it may not get up, but I would hope to just remind you that if we do fail it, he will have the opportunity of taking our decision to the Planning Appeals Board, and from that he may well get his original request granted. This at least gives us the opportunity to put it in place and trial it at somewhat more reasonable hours, and I do agree that 5:15 is a very early time if you are getting woken up by noise. However, if the noise can be contained, then I think as a business perhaps it has a place. Other than that, the Deputy Mayor mentioned crossover times. Under the amended motion, the only crossover time would be 5:30 p.m, when many city-bound workers will be vacating their parking spots anyway. So I'm not sure that that would actually be much of a problem. But I do thank you all, and for everyone who's participated in this debate. I guess we'll find out how we're going now.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? That's carried. Lost. So, do we have an alternate motion? Somebody moving? Councillor Finlay? Seconded by the Deputy, is it? Councillor Finlay, what is that motion? Have we got a copy here? On the screen? Oh, there it is. So, Councillor Finlay, you wish to speak to it?
I do, Mayor, but first I actually want to make a comment on process at the council and of our new council group. And as everyone else did, actually acknowledge for Councillor Harris's benefit that it's actually in bringing forward a motion that causes people to focus on the areas that are tricky that can actually flow into a decision being made. So as a result of your work through this and presenting that alternate motion, there is a motion to be considered here today in refusal. So I rise to support the refusal. The grounds of refusal and alternate motion has been tabled on the grounds of car parking, and there being insufficient, so that the provision of car parking is deficit to the requirements of the scheme. I would like to reinforce some of the comments from the previous item, which is although this application before council is refused, that there will be a great use for this beautiful space in a really important part of the community. So that's about the property. And to the proponents who are two women of the community, not he as keeps being referred to, that, you know, I have full confidence that with their entrepreneurialism and creativity that they will find a perfect use for either this or something else in the community, and that it's unfortunate on this occasion it wasn't possible to commingle those uses.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Yes, look, I support the words that have just been said by Councillor Finlay. I think in the report, the assertion that there would be no unreasonable impact on traffic and on the efficiency of the road is not correct, and thus the motion that is before us is an appropriate one and a defendable one, importantly.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Finlay wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? So that's one against, and the rest is for. That motion is carried. We have now can move on to. We have some speakers for 8.2. First of all, Lindy Crack.
Thank you. Lindy Crack, Launceston Swim School, 25 Shamrock Street, against the proposed planning for 27 Shamrock Street. The main reasons is noise. We're very concerned about the reflection of noise from this massive concrete wall that is going to be running down alongside the boundary, just outside our office. The second one is the extraction fan, which in its proposed placement as per the plans will also be running constantly just outside our office door, which, being the owner manager, I do 10 hours a day, 5 days a week. It's going to be a great noise to be able to try and run a business with. The noise assessment report in the application states that this unit will operate at absolute minimum of 86 decibels, going up to mid-90s. Music concerts start around about 100, so we're not far short of that right outside our door. WorkSafe Australia, page 7 of the introduction, permanent hearing loss occurs with levels from 85 decibels up, with national workplace standards outlining a program when this is exceeded. WorkSafe Australia also state that noise levels should be below 50 decibels if your work requires effortless conversation, which we will need to be able to deal with clients either face-to-face or over the phone. This is going to be a noise that we have no control over, but will be something that myself and my staff will have to deal with somehow. If it becomes an issue, we will be forced to keep our doors and windows closed all day, every day, to reduce the noise and the impact. This will have an impact on our health, as we won't be able to have fresh air with the doors and windows open. It will also increase our running costs, as we will need to pay for extra cooling, heating, etc. We're also hoping that the added noise, including possibly machinery noise through the walls, doesn't affect our teachers' ability to safely communicate with the children. The only suggestion that I have for all of this is that the extractor is moved from the front of the building to the rear of the building, where it won't have an impact on anybody. Thank you.
And Damon Marshall.
Hi, I'm Damon Marshall from S Group, and I'm representing Anstey Construction and A2 Joinery, who are occupying 25 Shamrock Street. We are proposing a new workshop shed in a light industrial zone, so it's definitely an appropriate use. Anstey and A2 currently use this site as offices, and what they're doing, they're simply creating more space for production, for product and material. They're creating more room for safer operations, just giving themselves more room, and that includes loading and unloading vehicles inside the shed as opposed to out on the street. And it should be noted that they're not increasing staff or actual production. It's purely giving themselves more room to do what they currently do. We've been able to tick all the boxes from a planning point of view, including specifically addressing noise with a favourable acoustic report. The acoustic consultant hasn't come today because it takes a lot more than 2 minutes to explain how complex the acoustic issues are, and generally it's a misunderstanding of the information is why the representations have occurred. So thank you.
Thank you. Somebody happy to move a motion? Councillor Mackenzie, as is. Is there a seconder? Councillor Spencer. Wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
I will, Mr Mayor. Look, I've read through this submission, and again, there's no doubt when you drive down and around the site, it's a difficult site because of the small streets frontage, but it is light industrial in the main with some residential amenity around it. Interestingly, there were no representations from the residences that were on the western side of the proposed development, and the only significant representation was in relation to the swimming centre, and not wish to underscore any of the comments that have been made by Mrs Crack and the other representation that was made by the owner. Again, looking through the issue is that the building specifications fit the zone, in that the setbacks are all within alignment of the process. Unfortunately, that means a cement wall right on the boundary can be built, which is right next to the car park and I guess the office area of the LA Swimming Centre. Again, one of the key issues that I was concerned about was noise levels, and again, looking at the acoustic report, and I'm no acoustic engineer, but reading through the process, clearly there's already ambient noise that's coming from the Midland Highway, which I think is talked about at 75 dBA in a typical sense, and the comments they made is the noise emission from the joinery equipment operating in the existing workshop was audible intermittently, so not significantly increased on what was there. I appreciate the comments regarding the extractor fan and where that's situated, but that seems to be, from what I can gather, where it is at the end of the car park, and facing out towards the street. Again, it's a difficult assessment. There are traffic issues, comments made in regards to lack of increase in personnel, in that they're basically moving some staff, I think 2 to 3 staff across the road. Sits well for me from the point of view for this development. The only issue that I made this morning and will make again today is that in approving this today, it doesn't stop a future use in that building which might have more people in it, and that's probably a greater concern for me, is that future use of the building might bring other people into it. But I guess we're basing it on what's there today, but we need to be aware in making the decisions that we do today that we're actually setting up something for the future, and some future potential use which might have greater usage in that area. But having said that, I've looked through the rest of the planning criteria and I can't see where this development application actually falls fault with anything there. Parking is an issue, but it's an issue in that whole area. There are some minor parking discretions where I think it requires 6 and it's 4. If you drive down the street now, there are cars parked everywhere, which are not necessarily relating to this business, but particularly I guess that some of the business now actually park on the street. By putting 4 additional car spaces off the street, it's actually going to improve the situation. The safety aspect, I guess I was concerned based on the comments made by the representatives in relation to children walking down the street and going to the swimming centre, walking past there, again particularly with traffic going across in relation to forklifts. Again, the main issue was the reversing of trucks where there's a traffic management plan that's been agreed to be held. But they're the sorts of issues that sort of concern me in relation to the matter. On the whole, though, that I'm supportive of it, but I'm interested to see what others have to say.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I went and looked at today. These big concrete walls, there's no noise that comes out of these. I've done a lot of these sheds as an electrician. Concrete walls really hold the sound in, and the fan coming out the front, you very rarely will hear it running. So I will be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. I tend to agree with the sentiments expressed by Councillor Spencer and Councillor Mackenzie, that, and I especially wish to reiterate his concern about the use of, especially these light industrial areas, these mixed-use zones where they have been built for one purpose, perhaps, and over the course of time, it gets repurposed, and there's very little in the way of being able to stop that process at that point. And I think that the council, I would just, in this case, I will be supporting this development application, but I would be, beseeching the council that we start to take this problem very seriously, because we're going to see this more and more, I think, in terms of our conflict between our urban living areas and our urban mixed-use areas. And an example in that area, and as Councillor Mackenzie points out, it's not a result of this business, but we have people parking in that immediate vicinity where there are houses and there are businesses in all sorts of odd places, and I can only see this getting worse, basically. Great that they're providing those spaces, and that's a mitigating factor, but yeah, just something that we all have to, I think, shoulder at this point.
Thank you. Thank you. Question from the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Wondering with regard to the use of the forklift from one side of the road to the other, obviously the mixed-use nature of the zone, and specifically the number of young children that are obviously in the street with regard to the swim school operation. What are the parameters in terms of their ability to utilise the forklift without any traffic safety measures?
Director Hurst.
Thanks, Mayor. The officer's just indicating there isn't a specific answer, but there is a condition in the recommendation regarding submitting an approved and having approved traffic management plan, and particularly making reference to the use of reversing forklifts and the need to actually have somebody controlling the traffic for those instances. Does that sufficiently answer?
Councillor Finlay.
I'm going to ask a question I can and then speak later, so separately. My question is, this morning I think we were advised that the traffic management was for the trucks that were arriving and departing, but not for the forklift. Can that be clarified?
Yes, Director Hurst.
When the condition talks about delivery trucks, given the trucks can't get into the sites, presumably the forklift will load and unload them essentially from the street, because I don't believe there's a loading bay of that nature on each of the titles. So there will be some deliveries from the street, given the nature of the arrangement of the buildings. And that's what will need to be managed with a traffic management plan.
Question, Councillor.
Yeah, I'd just like to challenge that a little bit further, because to me, I understood that the forklifts were actually going from one side to the other. There are two buildings, and therefore they'll be transversing the street, and therefore I would have thought some traffic management in relation to those specific movements would be warranted.
General Manager, wish to comment or not?
just looking at it and listening to the discussion of council, if you were to remove the element that says the delivery of goods and services to the site, that was to actually come out of the condition, and it just basically talks about where a vehicle is anticipated to require reversing and or public, that covers off on both forklifts and trucks, and yeah, so
that can be done. Is that an amendment needed?
Yeah.
It's being moved.
Yeah.
For forklifts to operate on the street, they need to be licensed to operate on the street. And some forklifts you do see on roads, but they're generally registered vehicles to be on roads. So if they were crossing the street, then presumably they would have the same ability to do that as any car crossing the street if they're licensed to operate on the road.
So the amendment still refers to reversing vehicles. Yeah.
So it's still covered, or not? Councillor Dakey, question or? No, we've got other speakers, so you could, yeah. All right. Any other questions on this matter? Will Councillor Finlay wish to speak? No. Don't say it, no.
I do wish to speak, and I had clarity before the Deputy Mayor asked his question, and so I think it was a great question, because the briefing that we had this morning was that trucks would enter the eastern element of the property adjacent to the swimming pool, and it was at that point that they needed traffic management, but the forklift as a registered vehicle would just be managed across the street. My question is, it wasn't intended that there was traffic management for the forklift. Is it expected that the number of movements of the forklift is too much to provide traffic management? Is that... I'm confused by the response.
Well, I'm sorry if I've confused the matter, but the principle here was to leave the details of the traffic management to a traffic management plan to be endorsed by the Director of Infrastructure. So those detailed movements and operational requirements will be managed through a condition and through submission of a plan. That was the intent of the condition.
So, Councillor Finlay, wish to speak?
Yeah, I will. So now, in speaking to the motion, having considered all the parameters of the scheme and the concerns for both noise and safety of the children that attend and the workers that attend the swimming pool, I am in a position to support the motion before us today, given it's a light industrial zone and the uses reasonably meet the requirements of the scheme. But to support myself to seek to approve this, I did just want to read from the noise assessment, because I think it's important. At condition 20 for us, it refers to the engineering controls contained within the report, and the report determines that the noises that breach the acceptable elements for the project are what they call breakout noises, which are those that where the roller doors are open and so therefore the sounds escaping from the structure. And we were advised this morning, and the noise report does confirm that the roller doors are to be closed during periods where the multiple pieces of joinery equipment are likely to be operated at either of the workshops, which cause that breakout noise. So the report determined that the noises are within reasonable parameters, and that they've recommended a control that we have as clause 20 in our report to satisfy that.
Thank you. Councillor Dakin.
Thank you, Mayor. Just in quick summary, I tend to agree with my council, especially Councillor Mackenzie, Councillor Spencer and Councillor Walker. In quick summary, we've got a new building, we've got a new design under new specifications with noise and technology to offset that. We've got 4 new car parks off street. We've, in my opinion, the area is going to be left in a better position that is now under the current zoning. We're transitioning from residential across to industrial and commercial, so I'm in favour of the motion.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close?
Just in clarification before I do, just regarding the traffic management, again, I'm not sure that it quite reads that way in the motion, that I would say total traffic management of the site should be part of the condition rather than just in relation to reversing vehicles. Is that?
Director Hurst.
Thanks, Mayor. I apologise. We do seem to have confused the matter with some of our answers. I think that if you read the condition carefully, it is that there is a traffic management plan required that needs to be approved before commencement, but that part of that it should include that aspect about the reversing vehicles, not that it be just about reversing vehicles.
Okay, I'm comfortable with that response. Thank you very much. On the basis of that, I have nothing further to say, and let's vote.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. So we're going on to 8.3. We do have one speaker, Michael Bonacci.
My name's Michael Bonaski. I'm the architect for this project in Leonard Street. Mayor, Aldermen, Council, members of the public, our proposed development at 8, 10, 12 Leonard Street is a positive contribution to the South Launceston area. This development could have been submitted as 3 individual townhouse development sites over a period of time, but we chose to submit all 3 individual sites together at once to be transparent to the surrounding neighbours and to work with Taswater Launceston City Council. We have taken into consideration advice given and the requirements by council departments, Taswater and the adjoining neighbours. We have spent some time reworking and incorporating key elements as requested to produce this development in front of yourselves today. Some concerns from neighbours were the removal of trees, which in investigations of council, it's not zoned scenic protection, thus council has permitted the removal of these trees. There was concerns over the traffic flow in this street and has been investigated and endorsed by an independent traffic engineer. There's a Tyson Street matter, is the adjoining unbuilt street, which is on their neighbouring southern boundary, but our development sites are addressed as it's Leonard Street, and we have designed our proposed development to meet current site conditions. I kindly seek your endorsement and approval for this development site today in promoting a positive contribution to further inner city living opportunities. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I have no other speakers. Are there any other speakers? No. So is someone happy to move a motion? Move Councillor Mackenzie, seconded Councillor Finlay. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
I will. And again, when you read through the DA, it pretty well ticks every box. So it's actually challenging to find reason why you wouldn't support it, to be quite frank. I appreciate the comments made by the representatives in relation to the tight street corner, traffic management and so forth like that. But again, we've had traffic engineers that have determined that the proponent's gone away and redesigned the access from one of the blocks, which was on a steep curve, to make that a flat level to make it easier to ingress and egress from that side. But quite frankly, when you read through it, I appreciate the comments regarding trees, and I guess all of us like to see our fauna and flora looked after as best we can. The reality of it isn't in scenic protection, and therefore we don't have any control over it from the perspective of a planning perspective and those trees coming down. Maybe they're in the wrong place, but the reality of it is they are 3 residential blocks which are available for development, and the proponent is developing in accordance with an appropriate plan.
Thank you. Councillor Finlay. Any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, no, just in regards to there is no scenic protection over these trees, and while maybe the case that these trees are removed in this particular development, it's I just would encourage the developer in every case with every tree, if there is a chance that they can be preserved, that they should be, because it really does go to the amenity of the entire area, not just for that block. I support the comments of my fellow councillor, and the only other point I'd make is that quite a lot of representations against this, especially to do with traffic movements and things like that. But I think you'll find that especially when the surrounding houses have very similar issues themselves on that street, on the corner, and things like that. So. It really is, it's a worthy development and a great sort of contribution to the area. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close? I'll put the motion, excuse me, I'll put the motion, losing my voice, those in favour? That's all councillors present, that is carried. 8.4, we have some speakers. Pixie Load.
Mr Mayor, Alderman, there is very little green open space near the city along the waterfront, and we understand that this precinct has been designated to house monuments. There is now one extremely dominating and intrusive permanent monument in the area and several completely unrelated smaller ones dotted about. The whole area is taking on a very ad hoc, uncoordinated and ill-considered look. Any more things of any description in this space will present the visually cluttered and crowded appearance of a graveyard. Please give serious consideration to locating this monument elsewhere. As this applicant is a war memorial, there seems to be no logical reason why it shouldn't be located near the Kings Park War Memorial. No one has any quarrel whatsoever with the merits of this applicant. We all simply ask that no more monuments or memorials of any kind be added in this precinct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stephen Trednick.
Good afternoon, Mayor, councillors, fellow members of the public. I'm Stephen Trednick, 50A Franklin Street. I'm a general practitioner. I've been providing medical services to the Launceston community on weekends and public holidays for the past 30 years. My concern is, like the previous speaker, the proposed memorial to Richard Atkinson in Kings Park. Firstly, my sincere commiserations to Dr. Ross and Mrs. Kate Atkinson for the loss of their son, Richard. I understand this is a sensitive subject involving grieving parents. I mean no disrespect for their great loss. To be brief, I support the idea of a memorial for Richard Atkinson, but what form should it take? Instead of the proposed cold, hard steel and concrete sculpture, why not plant a beautiful, long-lived specimen tree together with a plaque and an act explaining the circumstances and reason for the memorial tree? Perhaps a Lebanese cedar, a tree from the Middle East, or one of our grand Tasmanian gums. If Council votes for this memorial sculpture, I suggest a more appropriate site for it is nearer the Anzac Cenotaph near the Queen Victoria Museum. Secondly, may I take this opportunity, this is my first representation to Council. I've been inspired to do so by the ugliness and insensitivity of the Polish memorial. I walk my 2 dash arms through Kings Park daily. Kings Park is one of Launceston's sacred sites. It looks straight down the river. It's a popular path for Launcestonians and visitors. I can imagine Aborigines would have enjoyed this location for thousands of years, sitting on its once clean sandy beach beside the freshwater creek that ran down Margaret Street. Kings Park, with its levee bank, is now an amphitheatre. My vision of what Kings Park should be is a beautiful park with trees and an amphitheatre.
Yeah, thank you. Your time is up. Thank you. Genevieve Deluva. Not here. Don Walton.
Mayor and councillors, first up, I've just been made aware earlier that I am not a ratepayer, I don't believe. I seek leave to address the council.
Yeah, we'll give you permission, sir. No worries, Don.
Thank you. For those of you that may not be military, a sapper leads the troops into a war zone. You've probably seen the stereotype of the guy in front of the convoy with the mines, metal detectors, leaving the mines. Richard Atkinson was 22. He was killed doing his job, which was sweeping a mine, protecting a convoy. I've been down to the park. There are 3 other memorials there, one of about 50 square metres for the Polish pioneers, there's another one for the 2nd 40th Battalion, who served in New Guinea. It's about 6 square metres. To set things right, it's not a sculpture, it's a Bailey Bridge panel, which weighs 250 kilos, is 1.5 metres high, 3 metres long, somewhat smaller than your computer screen. The symbolism is, it's the bridge from life to death, which a lot of engineers have done. There's a high percentage. There you see it up there. So if you take a scale on that, it's 1.5 metres high for the metalwork, maybe 300 to 400 mil high for the plaque, and it takes up a whole, probably 8 square metres. I'm asking the council because Richard Atkinson was a local lad. We've got plans to open it with fees from all over Australia from the engineers. Richard was a sapper. The Sims followed the sapper. I'm requesting the council approve it. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. That's all the speakers I have. Are there any others? So I have someone to move the motion. Move Councillor Soward. Is there a seconder? Councillor Mackenzie. Wish to speak to it, Councillor Soward.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And I thank the people who've taken the time to get along today to speak. I guess I wanted to address the remarks of the first two speakers, Ms Lowe and Dr Tredinick. And I agree with them. One of the things that's really, really important is not to have ad hoc things around the place. So in referencing those remarks about ad hoc memorials and things around the place, back on the 14th of November 2016, the council at the time dealt with the Kings Park commemorative precinct policy. And the fundamental principle behind that policy was, and as it says here, requests are occasionally received by the City of Launceston from organisations, groups and clubs for permissions to place installations within Council's parks and reserves. And it says here that Kings Park will be the focus of commemorative installations, and I know that was picked up in Mr Walton's remarks. He did remark that there were other monuments and things in that area. So that just brings a little bit of, I guess, logic as to why there is a little collection of memorials there. And with respect to both those speakers, I'm sure that if Council didn't call it the Kings Park Commemorative Precinct Policy, they call it the Royal Park Precinct Policy or the Princess Square, there's always people that support things in certain places and don't like them elsewhere. But the reason they're there, it dates back to that document 2016. I also agree with Dr Tredinick's remarks around a very good suggestion, I think, Mr Mayor, around having trees or shrubs or something like that as a memorial. And I've been to parks around the country where there's a tree that was generated from a seed brought back from Lone Pine, for instance, and there's thousands of those all across the country and make very good memorials. Mr Walton's point around why this particular design has been chosen is very apt, because it is a memorial, Mr Mayor, dedicated to combat engineers. And to combat engineers, to lay people like me, I might look at that and think, oh yeah, whatever. But as is specified very clearly in the application and by Mr Walton, to combat engineers, the idea of a Bailey Bridge, it's the bread and butter, the fundamental thing that combat engineers do. So I guess with all respect to combat engineers, I think they probably know what's a fitting symbol for the work they do, and I'm a lay person as far as that goes. So that's why that design's been chosen. It is a very sensitive matter, particularly with added sensitivity, and I do specify, Mr Mayor, in the application, it is a combat engineers memorial. It's not necessarily a memorial dedicated to one person or another person or a group of people. It's a combat engineers memorial, and in this particular case, as was pointed out, a young Launceston gentleman gave his life carrying out a role in a conflict. So there is also that local context to it. I do understand the concerns people have with memorials sprouting up around the place, and do acknowledge that. But as I did say, Mr Mayor, the reason they are there, it is because they've been there as part of a council policy. It's not an ad hoc. It's not just a blow by blow. Where will we put this one? That's that's all I want to say at the moment. I'll be interested in other conversations that other councillors might have. And again, as I said, I would thank those who took the time to write to us and also address us today.
Thank you. Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Firstly, I'd just like to commend the sensitivity in which both the representatives put their case today. I think that's the most important thing that's been done in relation to the fact why we've got this memorial before us today. But I think we also need to be aware that we're here today sitting as a planning authority, and this is a planning decision that we're making in relation to the matter. We have a policy in regards to what we're actually doing in regards to the precinct, which is something that has been decided by or determined by council some time ago with some parameters around it. This has been put together in regards to those parameters, and we're sitting here, and actually from a planning decision point of view, it's actually quite simple. It actually meets the planning scheme. So the reality of this from a planning point of view, we as property owners have decided on a policy on how we are going to deal with this, and as a consequence of that, we have this memorial that's been put before us today. Whether we like the way something aesthetically looks, and again, the eye of the beholder, and I'm certainly the Polish memorial that was put in a little while ago certainly has shocked a number of people around our community in the way it looks and forms on that space. But the reality of it is it's been done in accordance with the policy. I appreciate there are probably 5 councillors around this table who weren't there when this policy was put to bed, and maybe it's something we should review for future sense. But today, I believe we have a planning decision to make, which is in relation to this matter, and I believe under the planning scheme we should approve it.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. Can I start with a question that doesn't sort of erode the time that I have to speak? Thank you very much. If what Councillor McKenzie says is true, that this is purely a planning matter, then would it be the case that our policy has no bearing on this matter? In other words, if someone had submitted this plan without us having a policy, would we still be assessing it under the planning authority?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So in order to lodge the application, they need the consent of the landowner, which is in this case is the council. So a decision was made by the council last year in September to support the construction of the memorial, and so there's the consent that was provided. So therefore, they're able to lodge an application for planning with that consent.
But then, as a subsequent question, what information was given? And you have to excuse me because I wasn't on council then. What information was given? Because quite clearly, and you know, this is in no way wishing to disrespect anyone in this room. It would seem on a number of levels that this particular design does not meet that policy. So what information was given at that time when this was given that approval?
Gentleman.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So the minutes and the agenda are available 24th of September 2018. So the memorial, as shown, the location was presented to the council and approved at that time. So and this is consistent with that proposal.
Okay, so then essentially it would seem that, you know, as a comment, we've given consent to a proposal that does not meet our own policy. So let me address this issue and begin by echoing the comments of my fellow councillors that this is a convoluted process, and we're being put in a position where we're adjudicating between essentially a family's wishes to commemorate the sacrifice that their son made and that engineers in general have made, and the public, who, you know, rightly, as it is public council land, you know, wish to maintain their amenity in, you know, what would seem to be a fairly confined area on the waterfront. I would be the first to say that I think the council have erred here back in September when this was given the approval to progress to this stage. And if I draw the council's attention to our own policy, point number 2 says that public open space areas are an important community resource and installations need to be carefully designed to ensure they do not impact negatively on these spaces or park users. Now, I would argue that we've already exceeded that particular part of the policy by allowing the Polish memorial to be built, but we're not here to discuss that. And if we go on and look at other points in the policy, it will be assessed, applications will be assessed against the following criteria: the degree to which the installation is aligned with the City of Launceston's wayfinding, heritage interpretation and public art policies and plans. Point B, the degree that the installation tells the history or story of Launceston. No new installation will be considered which commemorates a person, and consequently this particular installation was adapted to beyond acknowledging one person. The design elements of the installation are to be cognizant of the site. So I suppose I would ask my fellow councillors to have a look at that design and just ask themselves whether it is cognizant of the site. Now, as I said, I feel it's most unfair, but this is our job, to be put in this position where we're having to weigh, a family's wish to commemorate with the community's wish to maintain their amenity. I think the council have erred, allowing it to get to this position. And I appreciate what Dr. Steve Tredenick did say in regards to the Atkinsons, and I think that is a most heartfelt sort of response. But it's a disappointing outcome. It's a disappointing outcome with the sculpture that we have there that's sort of been put in the middle of the park in memorial of Polish community. But as my fellow councillor says, we do sit as a planning authority. I'm going to ask the council if we can lay this application on the table in order to review our policy, if it indeed is the problem here, if this is what is causing the conflict, or to negotiate a suitable outcome for this particular situation, whether it's negotiating a suitable location or a suitable design, because this is a design that's being put in a public space, and at no time has the public had any input, not into just this design, but any other design that's gone in there. It is a process here whereby we're being asked to approve designs that the public have had no input into, and it's in a public place. And I think that's problematic. And as I say, I think in that sense, the council have erred. May not have been intentional, of course, but in that case, I'm asking that we lay this on the table and enter into some discussions with the applicant, with the outcome hopefully being that we can find a resolution that suits both them and the objectors.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for laying on the table? Councillor Dawkins? Don't have discussion. I put that motion that we laid on the table. For those in favour? I'll let you ask a question, which not really, but... Well, discussions will be going to General Manager. Wish to comment?
I mean, clearly it's a development application, so there's a time 42-day process. Really, there's an ability to be able to comply statutorily in respect of delay, but obviously the plans for the proponent was to obviously subject to a council decision to proceed certainly more quickly than that. But again, that's from a statutory point of view, you've got the ability to be able to consider it within the 42 days.
So a supplementary question to that. So laying it on the table would require contacting the applicant if they sought to give an extension, then otherwise it has to be dealt with today and approved as of right?
Director Hurst, I think the deemed date's 12th of April, which is next week. Next Friday. So the motion is to lay it on the table. All those... Well, we don't discuss those motions. That's the difficulty. Do you want to add anything or not?
I think the question that Councillor Finlay was getting to is that given the date is going to be before any formal, the deemed approval date is going to be before any formal ability for the council to assess it again as a planning authority, it would be inappropriate for councillors, without knowing whether the applicant would provide an extension, to be able to vote on that matter.
Unless somebody contacts them now and we get that back before the meeting finishes.
Well, we can do that, man.
So what do you want to do? Put it to the vote? Oh, the lay on the table? What? Yeah, until we contact them. See if we get a response. Question?
So my question is simply, does that mean that we'll bring it back to the table today?
Today, correct.
Right, okay. Assuming we can get hold of the...
Well, if we can't, we'll still bring it back and we'll have to decide.
Okay.
So you understand? So we move, it's been moved that it lay on the table. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? So that's lost. Thank you.
Sorry, could we just have any against?
So where do we get to? So we get to Councillor Dawkins. Do you want to speak to the motion?
Of course, you can't begin to talk about this without expressing deeper sympathy to the Atkinsons. A terrible, terrible thing to happen to any parent. But I also agree that the park is becoming overcrowded, and I know this is about council policy and not about this planning matter, but I did ask the question this morning about the consultation, as indicated in the policy that consultation had occurred, and was told that there really were just a few people in the traders in the direct vicinity of the park who were the only people consulted. So I think there is an opportunity for a future review. I expect that this matter will pass today, and that is perhaps appropriate, but if before this happens again, I think we need to revisit this policy, conduct a thorough community consultation about how they want this particular park to be managed, and then move forward. I would also like to say that as a woman and a feminist, I'm so sick of hearing the words like Kings Park, Royal Park, Princess Square, St George's Square. Where are the Aboriginal words? Where are the words that speak to the whole community that was alive during this time? I feel as though women have been expunged from history when it comes to how we name our places. So there seems to be an opportunity to say that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Gibson.
Thank you. It's an opportunity, it seems, to say anything, but on this instance I would like to say that we have a planning application before us, and based on the current policy that has been endorsed by the City of Launceston, I'll be supporting the application before us.
Thank you. Councillor Finlay.
I indicated to say almost a similar thing, and that is that there was a policy to develop and a decision by the landholder, and now a planning application before us that reasonably meets the requirements of the scheme, and therefore should be approved.
Thank you. Question, Councillor Walker.
It's a question for any councillor who is saying that based on our policy that this should be passed. It's a question of whether you've actually read the policy, because quite clearly, patently, this sculpture, this monument does not meet not just the policy. Perhaps you'd like to have a look at the map in the policy, which directs you to the exact locations of the potential monuments. This sculpture, as well as the Polish memorial, does not meet the criteria of that map. It's quite simple.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Sauer, do you wish to close?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I thank all councillors for their contribution. I look forward to the vote.
Thank you. We'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? So that's 2 against, the rest is 4. That motion is carried. Council now no longer sits as a planning authority. I think I'll just give 1 minute for people to leave that are leaving. No, that was for the children. Thank you. We'll move on to the Mayor's announcements. I've just got 2 certificates. One is an appreciation from the Dogs Home to us. Thank you. Us as a council, we had a lovely time with the Dogs Home a few weeks ago in the civic reception, and they are very appreciative, and they thank yourself, General Manager, and the staff for the way that you've been able to work together. So thank you to you. It's been passed on from them. But also we had the Naval Association here, and appreciation of the Naval Association have given us this plaque as well. So just for council. You know, I think that's it from myself today. Thank you. So we move on to councillor reports. No? We move on to questions from councillors. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you, Mayor. When will Council adopt the Palukani term for the River Tamar, Cunnamalooka, on Council websites and in common use, especially considering the name Cunnamalooka River Tamar was mandated in 2014 through the Nomenclature Board at the same time as Kanyanyi Mount Wellington, which has now become the common and popular name for Kanyanyi Mount Wellington?
Would General Manager wish to comment? Or?
No, I think we've got action already in train in respect of altering that on our website and communications. I'm getting nods from our communications manager, so we can certainly respond more formally, and so take that on notice and respond more formally to the next meeting, just to update council on where things are at.
Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm just inquiring to see how many unneeded assets we've got that we can probably sell. That's costing us a lot of money, and we probably can do with the money to offload some of them.
General Manager.
Yeah, so councillor makes a very good point, and so the strategic asset management plan that is in draft form, along with the long-term finance plan that is in draft form, is coming to the next councillor workshop, and you'll note that part of the improvement plan of those documents is to do exactly as you suggest. So there's a lot of work involved in doing that, but certainly it's work that we need to do as a council.
Thank you. Councillor Stosnicek, did you have a question? No? No, sorry. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. A question in regards to Macquarie House, and a more specific timeline, if I could have it, on the potential completion date and opening time.
I can tell you completion date is May sometime. The official opening will be after the election time.
Covered, all covered.
Any more
well, the election's also in May, so...
Yeah, but so it'll be after that in June sometime, the official opening.
We don't have a specific date in mind.
No, not yet.
Thank
Still
you.
working that out.
Question for the General Manager in regards to the ongoing situation, waiting to hear back on an application for permit for operating helicopters from a specific site in Veresk. This is probably an adjunct point, but I was in the CBD a couple of days ago, and a blue and white helicopter was flying as low as I've ever seen a helicopter over the city. It was doing donuts, you might say, in the sky, if that's such a thing. What else can you call it? Cloud donuts? I don't know. It obviously sightseeing to some degree. I just would like to hear back from the General Manager at some point as to what, if any, limitations there are, what levers the Council has at its disposal, and perhaps, if none of the above are applicable, is there a proactive way that the Council can encourage people not to fly their helicopters, so low over the city or our general sort of city region, whether it's the gorge, houses, wherever?
General Manager.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So from what my understanding is at this point is we have our legislative ability to approve or refuse applications via the planning scheme for helipads. And so the one in question you referred to, I don't think a permit's been issued for that yet. We're still waiting on additional information, so that prohibition for the use of that site has continued. In terms of the the actual, I guess, in-flight actions of helicopters. It's the Civil Aviation Authority or a derivative of that actually has the mandate to control that. And I think that as a council, we're certainly able to lobby and actually write and understand what we can and can't do. And perhaps that, given that we have had an influx in helicopter related issues, that perhaps that's something as a council we should do, so that we're very clear on what the the options are. So I'll see to that, obviously following the meeting. So.
Thank you. You finished? Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Councillor Harris?
Thank you. Question, I'm not sure who to, probably the General Manager. 5 months ago we raised you in fact moved a motion to investigate 90-minute free parking in CBD car parks. We were told it would probably be April, a month or two ago. It's now April. I just wonder where we're at.
General Manager.
Thanks for the question. So it's on the agenda. I'm not sure whether you received the agenda yet for next week's workshop. So there's a discussion paper on that agenda. It's April, and we'll have the discussion in the meeting, and you obviously will seek some direction from Council.
Councillor Soward.
Thanks, Mayor. I've still got that visual of the helicopter doing donuts, and I'll make Councillor Walker happy. I've left my helicopter at home today, which is good. Jokes aside, Mr Mayor, I just wanted to take 30 seconds to thank Director McIsaac for his very, very detailed answer to my question on notice from last time around council-owned car parks being used for homeless people, for shelter, etc. I really appreciated the detail, and the really great thing about it, he's pointed out a range of services that deal with that, so I just wanted to publicly acknowledge that. Thank you.
Any other questions? No, we'll move on then. We have the questions there. Council workshop report. Somebody, is that right? I'm on the right one, haven't I? Got a few stunned faces there. I wasn't sure whether I've missed something. Moved by Councillor Finlay. Is there a seconder? Councillor Harris. Any discussion? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. That is carried. So I think we move down to 20.1, is it? Great Regional Cities Challenge. Someone happy to move a motion? Councillor Soward. Seconded. Councillor Finlay. Wish to speak to it, Councillor Soward?
I'd be interested what other councillors have to say. Obviously, happy to move it for the purposes of discussion. And I guess my remarks will centre on it. Obviously, some great thought there from the proponent in bringing it forward. I guess that, and I'll probably conclude what I'm going to say with a question. The item before us is asking for a one-off contribution of $5,000, but when you actually get in and start reading the paper, it seems that a lot of the things in it are cognizant on funding coming in from other sources. So I guess my question is, if we agree to fund the study for the $5,000 and all of that other money that's required doesn't come forward, I presume nothing happens. Is that a logical assumption for me to come to? Asked and answered. Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I'll sit.
Thanks, Mayor. If my memory serves me correctly, the presentation that we received at workshop in the last session followed on from quite a lot of community conversation where people present the idea, Launceston being one of the great regional cities of the world. And I remember being at a forum with retailers in the CBD with both the Chamber and CityProm there, and when the President of the Chamber raised that point, Mr Ingalls from the collective group of members of the community challenged the President and said, and what will we do to actually, stake our claim for that? And I like that when there's a tag or a catchphrase that you use that actually has foundation to it. So that he caused to challenge someone around an idea and then took action, I think is not unexpected of someone like Mr Tilbury. and that the way that it was presented was positive. And I think for our community, you know, positive action around, and it was actually the Deputy Mayor that said at the time, the power of community campaigns can actually make a big difference to the feeling within a community. And so we have something that we can work towards and stand behind, that can actually bring that collective impact up from a community. I think that it's positive that there's an opportunity for the project to be demonstrated and validated, is that a word? Yeah, and validated, and that it's clear that it becomes a community campaign from within. And in fact, it was curious that the Peace Trust were here presenting on the Peace Festival, because in my consideration of whether I support or otherwise this moving forward, I felt like the idea that was generated through Jean Hearn and the work that she did in preparing for the Peace Festival actually has become, it's sort of like grown from within the community and become its own entity. In the same way that I think something like is possible for something like this, and it was the Love Launceston or Love This Place campaign many years ago that the Deputy Mayor mentioned, that, you know, it gathers support and a positive feeling, but also action in the community. So for a significant investment of $5,000, it's not insignificant, for the potential of this project to be demonstrated and then to be born from within the community, I think is worthy to see what's possible.
Thank you. Question, Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. I guess just because it's stated in there that the council is already, council also offers community grants programs which support community and other not-for-profit organisations in there. Just question, and again, taking on Councillor Finlay's comment regarding the Peace Trust, who actually put an application for those funds through that process, as to what differentiates this particular project outside of that particular program, just from the point of view of saying, well, because they came and spoke to us, do we take it there? And again, this is not taking anything about the relevance of the issue, it's just the processes that we operate under as to why we bring this one to council for specific recognition as opposed to putting it through a normal process. So just querying, where is are we in our community grants programs phase at the moment?
No, this is a specific proposal that we've received, and so the report obviously demonstrates that the council already does significant works in respect of trying to activate the community or provide resource for community to undertake projects. So the community grants and the event sponsorship are two good examples of what we do. So this is the difference with this, is it's a discrete standalone community-led project that is seeking to basically establish itself, I guess, that would work in conjunction, wouldn't influence what we do, in the sense that obviously it's a discrete project that would be operated, and the way that the report is written, without dependent upon, you know, local government finance moving forward. So I guess the difference between this and it would obviously operate in a complementary manner to the way that we would conduct and continue with our own community grants project, but it's not intended that this is an actual application for a community grant from us specifically. It's about a discrete process around this program.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. I really am intrigued to hear each councillor's thoughts on this, because I must say I'm undecided, and the more I read it, the more undecided I become. I'm looking for someone to convince me. You know, I think probably most of us know Mr. Tilbury and understand, you know, his persuasiveness and his sincerity in wanting to, you know, bring forth this project. I suppose the two streams of thought in my mind are, one, if it is a community project, then should not it be community funded? I mean, there are crowdfunding ways to do these things. If this is genuinely to be a community project, it has to appeal to the community, and therefore you should be reaching to the community to fund it, not to the council. My other stream of thought is that it maybe doesn't replicate exactly what the council do, but it really does tread on the toes of a lot of what the council has in train already, and what our jobs are. It seems like a de facto type of project that really does, you know, it's the not jurisdiction, but, you know, it's the rightful place of council, and which indeed council are pursuing on a number of levels. So, as I say, I'm undecided. Really keen to hear from more councillors I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins.
I'm afraid, Councillor Walker, I might not be the best speaker after you, because I was going to say practically the same thing, that it does sound to me like this is something that could be seed funded or crowd funded through the community. It doesn't run alongside the grants program in that sense, because it's an abstract concept. This is a platform for potential ideas to bubble up through. So it's impossible, I think, for a council grants program which relies on concrete objectives and outcomes to be able to assess something like this. I think they're really interesting ideas, and I think we should be able to allow for them, but whether or not residents and ratepayers would want us to fund this, I'm not sure, because some community members have got a more direct access to council workshops than others, and so there's an opportunity for them to come forward and put their ideas forward in a way that not every member of this community has that opportunity. And there's also this crossover between City Prom objectives, Chamber of Commerce objectives, and now this sort of sense that we could get an app and get people who are connected to the digital world to, put forward their ideas and have them bubble forward to be voted on and then put into the project stage. Really noble and really fantastic use of the digital age, but not necessarily, I think, something that at this point council should get involved with. Perhaps we could, and perhaps we can develop rigorous policy around that, and it could run concurrent with the grants or events funding. But I think right now it's out here when we're still in this kind of concrete zone, and I just don't think it's appropriate right now.
Thank you. Councillor Danke.
Thank you, Mayor. After Councillor Rock and Councillor Dawkins, I might be in trouble trying to persuade you the other way, but I'll try. Both very well spoken. I suppose I look at it, and when Owen first, or Mr Tilby first put this forward, I scratched my head as I'm doing now and I said, what are we actually doing? We've got projects. I said, great, what are we building? I'm a bricks and mortar man. I like to see things. He then went into more detail, and you're right, Mr Tilby can be very persuasive, but he's pretty bloody passionate too, and not questioning that. And I'm still undecided, but then I look at what's the risk, what's the upside, $5,000 investment. I understand we've got City Prom, we've got other grants communities, but if you're putting someone as passionate and let's say as powerful as Mr Tilby behind something, he's putting his name behind it to help push it through and see it successful. Is that not such a bad thing to invest in? And I call it investing because we're investing in the future of our city, to invest that $5,000 and see potentially these 12 projects, and if we get just one of them that is successful, isn't that a great result? That's all I've got to say.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you, and so good words from everybody, because I'm sort of troubled by it as well, just in relation to what we're trying to achieve out of the whole thing. But again, it's a bit like, we're going to back the jockey, and to some extent, in some of these instances, we've got somebody with a proven track record in delivering things like BOFA and other things, who does challenge the community. He has an innovative way of thinking, can bring together ideas and conceptualise. And I think it's fair to say this came to us with some work done. It didn't come it's not unworked to this stage. So they've funded that from somewhere, either out of their own pockets or from some form of community funding somewhere else, but not from the council, to get to the stage where they presented to us and what we've got as the presentation in regards to it. We're investing a lot of money and time in regards to northern suburbs projects and trying to develop and improve that. Some of this is related to that, or potentially can be related to that. So the opportunities for these guys, alongside what we're doing, to be able to activate and do things, I think is something appropriate. I'm always about trying to make sure I get the form right in relation to how we go about doing these things, and that's why I asked the question in regards to whether an appropriate source would have been through the community grants projects and things like that, and not letting people shortcut through to other places. I think that's been properly answered by the General Manager and somewhat some of the comments that have been made here about why it shouldn't be there as well. So therefore I'm comfortable that we can step outside that process in making that decision today, which I was unclear of when I came into the meeting, so thank you for that clarity. So to me, $5,000 is a lot of money in a lot of people's eyes. In the context of Launceston and what this might achieve, it's probably not a lot of money. the interesting thing is once we've got there and we've got all these great ideas, who's going to fund the 100,000? And the crowdfunding and other sources is where that's probably going to need to come from, because I think quite clearly in here we're talking about funding to this level only and not the next level. So I'm interested in the feedback if we proceed with this as to how they then go to secure that extra $100,000 worth of funding, because there are innovative people out there. There are people out there, and I do things in my way. And sometimes you put your hand up and you want to do something through council, do something through the Tas Community Fund, you've got to fill in a heap of paperwork to get there. Some people aren't great at doing that. They've got great ideas but never get to the table because they don't want to fill in a form or can't fill in a form. I work in a philanthropic group who actually goes out and sources projects, and we put minimal amount of, yeah, well, again, maybe it is. But minimal amount of, but they're not quite those sort of projects, but yeah, minimal amount of sort of bookwork around it, but we go out and ingrain ourselves into what the issue is about, and we fund it on basically gut feel and what we can see in the community, and then we get feedback in relation to it. So to me, yeah, there's some real place for something like this, because I think we might have some innovators out there we may never see if we don't give them the opportunity. So I think based on the comments I made, and they've been very good comments made, that I'm actually now convinced to actually support it because of the comments made by Councillor Walker and Councillor Dawkins, because I think it is actually of value.
Thank you, Councillor McKenzie. Councillor Harris, reverse psychology.
Clearly, I also, like many of the other speakers, were undecided about this, and I've become decided. I think the $5,000 to be invested is a small amount for what could in fact be a very big outcome. And I recall the city of Burnie, when they were faced with the closure of the pulp, the council did 10 things, and out of those 10 things, probably 3 were successful, and the other 7 had varying degrees of success. And I think if we can get 1 or 2 good projects out of what is proposed, then I think it's probably a good investment of our $5,000. Remembering we did invest $10,000 on changing our names from alderman to councillor.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. In recent months, I've become someone who wants to see some of our policies and strategies come to life through doing. One of the things that I love in the northern suburbs that has happened through our investment in the northern suburbs through the ABCD initiative and the project pilots that have come about is the empowerment that has occurred in community. And in deciding whether or not I would support this concept, idea, consultant's proposal, whatever you call it, that came to us today, I thought what better modelling to the northern suburbs than to show them that the same kind of thing that we've been doing with and for them is something that we're willing to provide as an option for the whole of council. Rather than we'll just treat the northern suburbs differently, we'll follow the same idea cultivation model, the same idea of empowering our community, using the knowledge base that exists within it, the champions, the innovators, to come up to let their ideas bubble forward. And I think in that regard, the $5,000 investment is an appropriate investment.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any other speakers? Deputy, if you'd have the floor from Chair. I'm not feeling well, so I apologise for that. The Chair, I just want to say that obviously I was at that meeting that Councillor Finlay was at and Councillor Soward was there. And it was a discussion with retailers about the direction of our city, where we're going, and there were some great ideas and some people, and they didn't know how to funnel those ideas and through a system. And then obviously Owen was a guy who thinks on his feet, but also has been thinking about this for some time, because when it was announced to him before, he's had chats with the President of the Chamber, and he's got a method inside this CLIP, the Community-Led Impact Partnerships. And he believed that was a good method to get to where a lot of these people were talking about, and how can we energise them, use the skills and the excitement they have, not just the noisy ones that are out there that always make their say at a certain time, but a lot of other people that are not really commenting, how can we get them motivated and get them involved. So I followed up with Owen, and that's where this has developed from, and I think it's exciting. I think it's a real great potential for this city to see us to go forward, not just to be a great city, which I think we are, but to utilise a lot of the gifts in this city, and there's so many gifted people in our city that we need to know how we can utilise those. And through Owen and the method that he's prescribed, I'm not going to go through all that, but there's a whole system how he's going to put it into place. Why not spend the 5,000, get it into place, and then to see what develops out of that? That may be all we have to do, and from there it may just grow and be something exciting, and to see this city continue to be not just a great city, but an even greater regional city in this country. Thank you. And this world. Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Sauer, do you wish to close?
Thanks, Mayor. Great contributions. Thank you to everyone who spoke. I guess just in summing up, personally, hearing all the remarks, I would have been much happier myself looking at this if it had come to us with, we've already spent some money and we've done some work, whether it's through crowdfunding, as Councillor Dawkins said, or some other way, and then within that research having some firm commitments around that 100,000 or 80,000 or whatever it is. That to me would have been a preferred option. I do agree with a bit of what you said there, Mr Mayor, in that we have some wonderful people in our community. There's no doubt about that. I guess one of the frustrations I have at times is that some of the wonderful people in our community, it's a bit like that JFK thing, isn't it, about ask what, not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Some of the wonderful people come to us and go, fix it, this is broken, fix it, this needs work, fix it. Whereas I'd much rather see much more, everyone, council, government, federal government, the community, business, whatever, contributing. So I will be interested to see how people vote on this. I don't think it's a bad idea, but again, for me, I probably would have preferred it came to us in another way, and with some of that funding maybe locked in some sort of way to bring about what Mr Tilbury and others hope for. Thanks.
I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That's 7. Those against. The motion's carried. Thank you. Do you want a break or go to closed? That's why I asked the question. Well, just say that. You don't have to. So could I have somebody move a motion that we go into closed council? Councillor Finlay moves. Councillor Soward seconded. All those in favour? All those in favour go into closed council? That's all councillors present, so we now go into closed council. Thank you.
Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks.
Somebody happy to move that? Move Councillor Finlay, seconded Councillor Soward. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That is carried. Thank you. We now close the meeting. So we can go off air again.
Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of